Okay. Hey everyone, how we doing today? We're just gonna take, actually it's 2:01 now. We can get things kicked off. We have a great speaker here today, our good friend Bruce. He is going to be really touching on how founders make the transition from founder to CEO, which is, you go from being the player to the coach. Is something that is, you have an awesome idea that is really in its infant stage. You built the company up to a point, and now you're looking to really scale and develop the organization. So Bruce has a plethora of experience, both in the consulting field as well as within his own companies. So I'm really just going to give it to him here, and he has a great presentation set up, going through different aspects. Again, all the growing pains and successes on how you can be a CEO transitioning, from a founder. So Bruce, I'm going to give it over to you. And at the end, we're going to go through a brief Q&A just to introduce myself before we kick it over to Bruce. My name is Eric Schneider. I'm a VP of sales at Founder Shield. Founder Shield, I know a lot of you attending are some clients of ours, but for those who aren't, is full service insurance brokerage that focuses specifically within emerging markets. And obviously we work with a lot of founders that are kicking businesses off, and a lot of our points of contacts are CEOs, CFOs. So this really rings true to a lot of the people that we speak with on a daily basis. So I'm super excited, and Bruce, you could take it from here. And again, at the end, any questions that pop up, feel free to reach out.
Great. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. So yeah, today we want to talk a little bit about what is that transition look like, going from founder to CEO. And there's a bunch of things kind of packed in there. What we're going to walk through it, talk about what does transition look like, what are some of the things you can do as you move through that journey to make that a successful transition. I will say, if anyone has questions as we're going through this, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We've got the Q&A open, and I'll try to address things that kind of come up in context. Otherwise, we'll make sure we catch them at the end there. But you should have your little button somewhere on the screen that allows you to drop messages into the Q&A. So feel free to do that. So as Eric mentioned, my goal today is to really help, first of all, kind of distinguish or to differentiate between what does a founder role look like and what does the CEO role look like, so we have a little bit of a map. Talk a little bit about how your leadership focus changes between those two and how your strategies change, and where you can get support and resources. So for those of you that are either working with founders or are the founder and working into that CEO role, how does that process work? What are some of the things you can do to make that more successful, happen more quickly? So that's the goal for today. A little bit about me for those that don't meet me. I see a couple of folks that actually do know on the list here. But for those that don't know me, so I was a founder. I founded a tech company back in 2002. We grew it, put on the 5,000 list for 5 years in a row. We were 241st fastest growing company in America, 2009. So I've gone through the journey. I know what it's like to found a company. I know what it's like to grow a company. I know what it's like to sell a company. And I sold that a couple of years ago and focused on advising, coaching CEOs on growth strategies. So I'm a certified scaling up coach and 3HAG coach, some of the business growth coaching programs out there. I'm a bit of an adventurer, so I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I've done an Ironman, dove the Coral Sea, so I know what it's like to kind of set these big goals and then figure out how we're going to achieve them over a period of time. So I've learned how to apply these things not only in business but on personal side. With those kind of ventures comes some risk. So I have, I like to say I'm 0.75% titanium by weight. So I've had a series of injuries and accidents and been reconstructed in various ways. And it's really just, how does that process of recovery work? And how do you reset your goals when you have those kind of setbacks? A lot of businesses are having setbacks right now. So we kind of know what the journey looks like. But how do you do that? How do you reset goals? How do you kind of baseline things? I do host 2 podcasts, one called Scaling Up Services, all about service-based businesses. The other one is Thinking Outside the Bud, which is all about the business of cannabis. And I'm a father of 4 based in New York City. If anyone tells you it's crazy to start a company and a family at the same time, they're absolutely right. But there are some things that I can probably advise you on if you're in that situation or thinking about that situation. Different webinar for a different format. But yeah, so that's a little bit about me. So in terms of getting the most out of the session, I like to say look for one or two nuggets, one or two takeaways that you can actually go and apply. There's going to be a lot of things here today. It's a little bit overwhelming, but find those one or two things you can actually put into practice. I have a general phrase that I say a lot: bias towards action. We need to do things. It's one thing to sit there and think about things, and it's only when you actually go to take action, when you go to apply, is where you're going to learn. So make sure you try these things, experiment as much as you can. Stay open to new ideas. So to the extent that I'm presenting something that maybe you hadn't thought of before, go with it for a little while, try it before you dismiss it. I think one of the best skills of leaders is the ability to actually consider and experiment with new ideas. That's where we're going to learn. That's where we're going to expand. We're recording this, so you feel free to not take notes every single minute here. You can always rewatch it to go deeper, so you'll have the ability to get back into this. This is my email address if you have direct questions that if they don't come up here in the Q&A or we don't address them today. I always find that it's 5 minutes after the webinar that everyone comes up with the best questions. So email them to me and we can chat. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges of growth, or what happens in growth. So there are about 19 million businesses in the United States. If you look at these businesses from a number of employee point of view, 85% of businesses are less than 10 people. All right, so the vast majority of businesses out there in the world are, either solo businesses, single owner, single employee businesses, or at least under 10. As you move up the scale, these numbers drop dramatically, right? So you go from 15.5 to 2.5 that are under between 10 and 100, right? So the vast majority, 98% of businesses are actually under 100 people. As you move up this chain, this becomes less and less, right? So every stage, every time I add another layer of number of people, this drops precipitously. And there are only two companies, at least the last time I updated this presentation, two companies that were over, my million employee mark. And the one is Walmart. The other one, I think it's China National Petroleum, CNP or something like that, right? So if you look at how the distribution of companies fall in terms of number of employees, it's quite weighted, right? Most companies are pretty small. So here's the challenge: is that this transition that we talk about from founder to CEO is right in this middle between. I like to think of it as once you start to approach of 100 people is really where you start to make that change. And once you're at a 500-person company is really where you fully made that change. Someone who's leading a company of 500 people or more is 100% into the CEO role. Less than 100 people, I would say you're still more or less in founder role. So obviously it's all dependent on the exact nature of the company, but it's this meaty middle. And in fact, and that's where this huge drop off is between where companies, the number of companies that make it through this 100-person threshold it coincides with this transition you need to make from founder to CEO. And I don't think that is, I think that's correlated. I think there's a relationship between there because it's hard. Quite honestly, it's hard to grow a company. It's hard to shift from the founder to the CEO, and it's hard to do that successfully. And so that's really what we're talking about today: is how do you make this bridge? And without you making that transition, your company will not make that transition, right? So this is, as the leader goes, so does the company. Most people, when we can kind of think about how the company grows, we start, we found a company, we achieve success, thousands of people, we sell it, everyone hopes that this is a straight line. In reality, it ends up being something like this, right? We have all these kind of ups and downs. We have these fits and starts. Things retract, things proceed. It's highly variable. And as much as we want this straight line, the fact is the real strategy, the real way that most successful businesses grow is much more of a step function, right? You're going to have periods of stability and consistency. You're going to have periods of growth and expansion, but you're going to have that pattern in most companies. And the fact is that you're going to have that as a CEO as well, right? You're going to have periods where things are going to grow. You're going to have to change rapidly, and then you're going to stabilize. Things are going to be calmer. It's where you can kind of build things back in. You can build routines. You can sort of stabilize the situation before the next push. So every time I work with companies and work with CEOs on this process, I help them keep in mind that there are going to be periods of growth and expansion and then followed by stability. There's also some economics that go into here in terms of stable balances or sort of stable configurations of companies that end up creating these breakpoints, and you want to move through these unstable periods as quickly as possible. Kind of a separate discussion, but it's important to realize that that's how your development is going to go, both as a CEO and as a company. It's not going to be every day I'm going to go a little bit farther. It's going to have these periods of dramatic change followed by stability. So what typically happens? Most of the founders that I work with, that are starting this journey, or that have started this journey and they get me involved because they end up having challenges, is typically what happens is a founder will say, look, this is the work that I'm doing. This is my scope. And in order to expand the company, I need to delegate, right? I need to find other people to take this on so I can grow and scale. So they take a function. They take something like HR, and they say, oh, great, let me find someone who can take over all the HR stuff for me because I don't want to do that. Fair enough. I find an HR person. I get them up to speed. I don't have to worry about HR anymore. They're worried about HR. And then I go to somewhere else to have finance. Great. Let me find someone to take over finance. Good. They've got this. I don't have to worry about finance anymore. And I keep going through this. I go to sales, get someone to take over sales, someone to take over delivery. And then I'm kind of in this jam because I'm like, well, what's left? I'm going to be, the founder of taking out the trash, right? Like I've basically delegated all of my roles, and there's nothing left for me to do as founder. Typically, I find that you'll freak out at about 50%. Once you kind of get rid of about 50% of your functional role, that starts to become uncomfortable. You start to like, hey, where am I going with this? Classic problem. I see it happen again and again, and quite understandable, right? Like everyone's told, like, got to delegate. If you want to grow the business, you want to scale the business, you've got to delegate these functions so you can focus on more important areas. Yes, it makes sense, but it leads to this strategy of now delegated everything out. Instead, what you want is fundamentally, as you grow a company, as CEO, one of the things you want to do is expand your leadership capacity, expand the company's leadership capacity. Right? In order to do that, I need to push that circle out, that leadership circle. At the same time, I also want to concentrate my role as a CEO. Right? As a CEO, I don't want to be focused on the details. I don't want to be focused on everything that's going on inside my functional areas. I want to be focused on just the core part of that. So instead of delegating this entire wedge to somebody, what you want to do is you want to maintain that inner trivial pursuit piece, right? The inner pie wedge, and find somebody who can expand on that capability, right? You want to bring on leaders. You want to surround yourself with a leadership team that extends the leadership capacity of the company, but allows you to continue to maintain control of the core part of that, which is going to be long-term strategy. It's going to be planning, coordination between the functional departments, goal setting, metrics, KPIs, right? As a CEO, you want to keep that inner wedge and expand leadership capacity by bringing someone who's going to take out that greater segment. You're going to do that with these functions. So you're going to do sales, you're going to do your CFO, you're going to bring in VPs, CTOs. So in the end, you have the coordination of those activities at a long-term strategic planning level. You've got people in those roles that can actually expand leadership capacity and can take over the functional management of those areas, and that's going to be a much more successful strategy. And if I take this one level further, the next stage is going to be middle management, right? So you can start expanding the circle using this model. Now the reality is that this is kind of a perfect pie piece. It's not going to be perfect, right? In some cases, you may have more or less of that. These boundaries between you and your different functional heads may be a little disjointed. That's okay, that you manage that over time, you develop that, but those interfaces will be there and switch around. So it may end up looking something like this to begin with, because you're bringing on people at different capacity. You may have different needs, but you want to maintain that inner workings as a CEO. I just realized I'm not looking at the chat. I don't see any questions. So if you have questions, drop them in there. So let's look at the different kind of functional areas, and how does your thinking or how does your focus change when you go from founder to CEO? So sort of starting at the top, I mean, one of the core things a leader of a company needs to do is set the vision and the mission of the company. Founders are basically focused on setting a clear vision and mission. They're focused on defining the why. Why are we here? Why does the business exist? Why did we start the company? What are the core values? Establishing those, right? What are the values by which we choose to operate? And who is our core customer? Like, who do we serve? Right? Those are the things founders need to be focused on. As the company grows, a CEO is going to shift that to be more about evolving the culture and evolving the core values. So whereas a founder is going to be focused on why, a CEO is going to be focused on, okay, BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. Where is the next stage of growth we want to get to? Actions to live by. So this is basically how do our core values show up in the standard ways in how we choose to operate, how we choose to show up in our company? What are the acceptable and what are the unacceptable ways in which our core values are expressed? Core product and service is really thinking about, as opposed to customer focus, is going to be what is the thing that we solve for these folks, right? So founder is about getting all these things established. A CEO is about evolving and continuing them. If you look at marketing, a founder is really going to be focused on customer research, product design, service design, prototyping, testing. Founders are great at finding an unmet need and developing solutions to create value for a market that we can build a business around. A CEO is really about developing segments and channels, right? So a CEO is really good at figuring out your channel strategy. What partnerships do I need to make? How do I market this, not just sell it, right? So sort of that evolution from kind of the how do I find the idea to how do I get the idea out into a market effectively and efficiently from a sales point of view. If you look at sales, founders, customer development, they're actually selling new customers. They're involved in scoping and pricing engagements and deals. CEOs are very much about product optimizations. How do I take what I do? What do I need to add? What do I need to take away to make it more valuable, more efficient? What sales policies and systems do I need to put in place? So I'm not selling, but I'm figuring out how we are selling as an organization. And then building out sales forces, right? So they're a CEO, a founder is going to be an excellent seller. A CEO is going to be excellent at building out a sales team, right? So shifting that focus. Operations, founders are typically overseeing delivery, very involved in monitoring production and customer delivery, training teams, dealing with quality issues. When we have a defect show up, addressing that defect, figuring out how to actually engage in it. CEOs are very focused on standardizing systems and operating procedures, right? So designing processes, putting in quality controls, not dealing with quality issues, and capacity strategy. So how do I build capacity now and in the future for the organization? How do I match that to where our market's going to be and where business is going to be? Finance, a founder I find is very focused on sort of a controller role and cash management. So they're overseeing delivery, they're looking at quality issues. A CEO is very focused on resource allocation and financial planning. So it's about investor relation, capital allocation. How do I apply the capital that I have strategically? And what are my investment strategies, right? So out of all the things that I can do inside the business, where should I be investing my money and time and energy and resources that I have, right? So they're very ROI focused. External. So in terms of how a founder shows up externally, is very focused on networking, business development. It's about getting out there in the market to connect with potential customers. Oftentimes the founder is very much a public personality, so that it's the business is them. They sort of their personality is the business, and recruiting. So they're out there finding talent, bringing talent in. CEOs are much more focused on the industry, right? They're not trying to sell to customers or prospect at events. They're trying to establish themselves in the industry, trying to establish the business in the industry, understanding how are they going to impact, how are they going to shape the industry in different ways, whether it's through government regulation, whether it's through standards, how do you have a seat at the table in terms of how the industry is going to shape out? Speaking panels, how do we show expertise as a company? And partnerships, like how do we form the right relationships with other folks in the industry, suppliers, vendors, organizations that I can partner with. But it's very much about those relationships and those associations, not about selling. And I look at a couple of different factors. I've pulled out a couple of key ones here that I find in terms of, if you look at these and what the difference is between founder and CEO. If we look at core focus, a founder is very focused on execution, getting things done. CEO is going to be focused on strategy, right? So one of the big transitions you need to make as a founder to move to CEOs is really pull yourself out of execution, out of day-to-day, and spend much more time focusing on strategy. Where is the business going? Why is it going there? How are we going to differentiate? Your impact, a founder generates results, right? A founder is focused on, okay, bottom line, like I want to get things sold. I want to get people hired. I want to deliver results. A CEO is really delivering systems. A CEO is focused on how do I create systems for the business. People, if I look at how you relate to people, founder generally is very manager. It's very much about who needs to do what by when. A CEO is much more about leading, right? So shifting from this kind of manager mindset to a leader mindset. I like to use coach, right? So how do I develop talent? How do I lead people, develop talent, as opposed to make sure things are getting done? Product-wise, a founder is very focused on innovating. How to create new ideas, new products, new ways of doing things. A CEO is very much focused on standardizing. How do I create highly repeatable, efficient processes that I can grow and scale a business around? If I look at culture, a founder creates culture, right? A founder is oftentimes defines the culture. They are the culture in the beginning, but they're going to be sort of creating culture. They are laying down the path of what the company culture is. A CEO is much more about evolving. How do I take the culture that I have and how do I express it in different ways? How do I update it based on the context that we're in? How do I get more people imbibed in it and living it? How do I bring in kind of these core actions to live by? What does it mean to live our culture? How do I tell those stories? If I look at prospecting, founders are selling, CEOs are marketing, right? The founder is out there selling, actually meeting with clients, closing deals. A CEO is figuring out how do I create demand? How do I really engage tools of marketing to grow and scale the business? Customers, founders I find are very kind of customer satisfaction, right? Like I need to keep my customers happy. That's important and early in the process. A CEO is going to be much more value focused. What is the value that I deliver to customers? And potentially much more willing to say, hey, some customers are not going to be happy and that's okay. I need to either exit them or I need to figure out a different way to create value. Financially, founders almost 100% of the time cash flow. Do I have enough cash to fund what I want to do? CEO is going to be much more about ROI. I've got resources, I've got money, I've got teams, I've got things that I can do, assets I can deploy. How should I deploy them and where is the ROI? What is the best use of those things? So really kind of getting out of that day-to-day cash flow, do I have enough cash in the business, and more about how should I be spending my resources strategically? So if I kind of look through this list, these are, a pretty good core set of examples of, as a founder, these are the things you're generally focused on, the transitions you need to make to move into CEO mode, and some of these things are going to happen over time. You may start in certain areas and move into other areas later, but that's kind of my checklist of the things that I'm looking at when I look at, has a founder transition to CEO, what areas have they switched and what have they not? Common challenges, I find that there are, sort of standard things that come up that make this transition difficult. The first one I call the smartest person in the room syndrome, right? And in the beginning, it's understandable. I mean, founders, you tend to be very smart. I mean, you tend to know a lot. You tend to know the customer. You tend to know the market. Oftentimes, particularly if you're dealing with a kind of a technical company or a technical founder, there's often a huge amount of knowledge that they have. The challenge is, if we kind of think about our original diagram, if I continue to try to be the smartest person in the room, I'm never going to leverage that leadership circle, right? The only way that I can extend that leadership circle is being willing to bring in people who are smarter than me in these functional areas, right? So you may be very good at recruiting and HR, but unless you're willing to bring in someone who's much better at it than you, you're never going to increase the capacity of the organization. If you're pretty good with numbers, if you're not willing to bring in someone who's going to be a much more strategic CFO than you are going to cap the growth that your company can go through, right? So the first thing I'm always looking for is the smartest person in the room syndrome. And that's really, it's about confidence. It's about, I mean, sometimes it's getting tied up in ego. But if your sense of self is tied up into your intelligence or the perception of intelligence from other people's point of view, that's got to change before you're going to make this jump successfully. And it can. It's not easy, but you got to make that shift. The second one that I run into a lot is, I can do it better, faster than anyone. And quite often, you're right. Quite often, particularly if you're a founder who's kind of a technical founder or knows this industry, knows the business inside and out, the fact is you probably can do most things faster than other people. The problem is that that's a local optimization, not a system optimization, right? So if the business if you are just looking at that one task, it might be better. It might be more efficient for you to do that one task. But the fact is that the company will cap out. You will stymie the growth of your company if you are not willing to let those things go. In fact, you should let them go even if it takes someone 10 times as long to do that thing. Because the value that you can create by growing and scaling the company is going to more than make up for any loss of efficiency that that one task happens with that one person, right? So there's always going to be an inefficiency in the beginning, and hopefully it improves over time. You know, you delegate a task, someone will get better at it, and they may not get as good as you, but you know, that's not the point. The point is how do we create a system that's going to grow and scale? And the fact is you're going to have to let some things go, or you're going to have to be willing to let them get done not as good and slower than you would have done them if you want to grow and scale the company. And this is a tough one. It's a tough one for a lot of people to swallow. But you know, again, unless you make that bridge, unless you make that jump, you're gonna cap the growth. Another one I run into a lot, I call it the thrill of the sale. So if you're a founder who just loves deal making, loves to close the contract, loves to pitch, loves that feeling of, you know, seeing the ink signed, that can be a problem, right? Because it means that unless you're willing to kind of hand that over and willing to let someone else close the deals and focus more on strategy and strategic selling, you know, setting up processes, putting people in place to do that, developing materials, focusing on the marketing side. You know, if you don't find something else to get excited about, the thrill of sale can be a big bottleneck, right? When a CEO that loves to kind of close the big deals, again, will stymie the growth of the company, the ultimate, how big the company can actually grow. The other one I talk about a lot is the craftsperson. So, and this happens a lot in the technical space, you know, a brilliant engineer, a brilliant, you know, could be, you know, someone who knows security protocols or writes the algorithms for the searches and things like that. I mean, they're technical experts. If their essence, if their purpose in life is really tied to doing the work, it can, the ones that do move into the CEO role can often be not very happy, right? Because if that's what gives them passion and gives them satisfaction, it's hard to take it away. And there's a couple of options there. I mean, sometimes we move someone into like a, you know, chief technology officer or chief product officer kind of role, and we bring in someone else to actually take the CEO role. But that's a big one. And you know, sometimes it's about kind of repositioning. Well, what is creativity, or what is the thing? What is the problem you're solving? How can we recraft that as being the problem of the company rather than the particular technical thing? But the craftsperson syndrome can happen quite often, and you need to get over that. You need to push through that if you're going to successfully make it to the CEO role. And then the decision maker, I talk a lot about, you know, CEOs do not make decisions; they approve decisions. Right? They need to push as much of the decision making down to their leadership team, even down to middle management, as much as possible. A CEO that's making decisions, from my point of view, is hampering the growth of the company. You need to put in place approvals, right? Like, you need to know what's going on. You need to know what decisions have been made. You may want to put, for certain decisions, you may want to have an actual thumbs down, thumb up approval on it, of whether it's going forward or not. But the more you can move yourself into approval or move yourself into inform in terms of the decision-making process, the more you're going to free up that, more you're going to free that up, and you're going to make that possible. So these are the common challenges, they're patterns, the things that I see that come up a lot. So, you know, look out for them. You know, if any one of them is particularly strong, we may need to have, you know, a different conversation. We may need to look at a different formulation for how a founder is going to participate in the senior leadership team, and it may not be CEO. You know, and that certainly happens at times. But these are some of the reasons why. In terms of how to move through this transition, how to accelerate the process, how to deal with the process effectively, a couple of things that I tend to advise or tend to focus on founders, things that founders can do to start moving into that CEO role. One is just more time out of the office. And this kind of has two functions. One, if you put limits on how much time you can spend in the office, you start asking the question, well, where do I go? And now you start looking at, well, who are the organizations, who are the partners, what are the associations? How can I get out into the world and learn more about what's going on with my customers, with the market, with the competition? All those are good things. All those are going to increase your external view, your understanding, your sort of proficiency in the market, help you start thinking more strategically. The other thing that happens, if you're not in the office, people need to figure out how to get things done without you. All right, so you're going to force, it's a forcing function around the decision making, about empowering the other folks in the organization, getting out of the office, like literally making yourself unavailable, not just out of the office, but unavailable, will force a lot of this stuff to happen. Will force these decisions to get pushed down. You're no longer going to be called for the fire drills. You're no longer going to be called to resolve these day-to-day operational issues. The other thing I say is anything you do to change context in environments, even things like moving your office, changing the setup in your office, changing your calendar schedule, how I mean, for some people, it's even like what they wear to work, right? Like this is changing our context will force us out of those traditional or those previous habits and those previous ways of working, and will force us into new ways. All right, so I'm always looking at, well, what is the context? How is the context? How is your environment reinforcing your founder thinking? And how can we change that to encourage your a CEO mindset or a CEO way of working? Even things like the conference, like where you sit at the conference room table, like all those kind of things, shaking that kind of stuff up will create opportunities. The next thing is putting in place systems to get true and honest feedback. So some of this you can do in terms of how you design your leadership team, who you bring on your leadership team, and making sure that you're creating an environment there with your SLT to make sure that you are open, you are getting feedback, you are getting critical input on how you're operating, your strategies, your techniques that you're using both as a manager and as a leader. But I also encourage things like peer groups, roundtables, meeting with other CEOs, and obviously coaches and things like that. But basically anywhere you can get honest, true feedback from people who are reasonably isolated from bias and power dynamics, right? So the challenge is in most companies, you're the boss, right? Like every CEO, every founder runs around with a big sign above their head that says, "I can fire you," right? And that it's hard. It's hard for leaders. Even the best senior leadership team member is going to be affected by that. But anything you can do to get really true, honest feedback is going to be helpful. Creating a safe place to experiment. So I'm always looking for opportunities where founders can play around with kind of CEO behavior in safe areas, right? So where can they experiment, where the consequences of not doing it right are not very high, where they can redo it if need be. It could be within the company, it could be outside the company, right? Sometimes this is, getting involved in an association, sitting on a board, having some kind of leadership opportunity outside the company that allows you to literally play around with these things. How do I show up differently? How do I have this conversation differently? How do I ask more questions rather than give more orders, right? Like all these kind of things that are going to help you be a better CEO. Find a place where you can play around with this. So a safe place to experiment. I'm always focused on structure and discipline and habits and routines. We are creatures of habit. I'm a big fan of habit stacking, that the way we react to something is how we kind of stepped into it and how we built up to it. Disrupting those patterns will cause us to choose new ones, and hopefully we can build better ones or ones that are going to be more in line in what we need going forward. But for me, it's literally breaking things down to, okay, how do you schedule your day? How do you work through your day? What are the systems that you use? How can you redo those? How can you recraft those in order to start working differently? How to start thinking more like a CEO rather than a founder? So those are some strategies I typically recommend to folks. In terms of putting in this practice, a couple of things, takeaways or next steps for folks that are want to kind of go down this journey or want to improve their process on this. So the first thing I always say, assess your current skills, mindset, right? Always kind of take stock, baseline everything. There's various kind of assessments. I think I've got a couple assessments people can use if they want, but develop some kind of baseline that gives you a sense of, okay, where am I right now? And this might be a 360. I mean, you could get some feedback from folks. It could be third-party assessments, anything that will tell me, like, how am I showing up right now? Where am I on this journey? I'm a big fan of quarterly planning. So, not only do we set quarterly plans for all the businesses that I work with, but also all the individuals, all the leaders on the leadership team. We set personal, individual, professional development plans. And then I suggest sharing it with your core team. So if you've got a leadership team in place, making a public declaration on what you're focusing on, it really helps with two things. One is it telegraphs to everyone, hey, look, I'm working on this thing. And in there says, I'm not working on all these other things. so don't give me feedback on this other stuff because it's not my focus right now. And then people can start finding opportunities, right? They see you present, they see how you handled a situation, how you dealt with a meeting. If that's the thing you're working on, it kind of gives them permission. It gives them the ability to say, hey, look, I noticed this might be helpful for you, right? So that's why I say share it with your core team. The other thing, it gives you a little bit of accountability. It's like, hey, I'm working on this, so ideally I'm improving. If I'm not improving, like that's my commitment to the team. And then finding the right resources and programs. So look for, there's all sorts of content these days, whether it's online content, books, peer groups, videos, programs. There's so much coursework available these days. There's lots of tools, so it kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you have something that you're having a hard time finding something for, contact me. I can probably point you in the right direction. But find resources, start doing the work, and then get feedback and evolve your plan. All right. So one of the things that's really important is at the end of on some kind of regular basis, get feedback from the people that you're working with. All right. How am I doing on these things? Have I improved? Have I changed? Have I gotten better? Or have I gotten worse? Feedback will be your indicator of your progress. Those are kind of next steps. So I have a couple of assessments happy to give out for folks that they want to. So I have a management readiness assessment, which is really looking at management skills, a leadership team assessment. These are simple questions. I'm also a predictive index partner. I have a couple of free assessments. I mean, I don't have many, but people wanted to do a PI assessment. I like PI just because of the way it applies to the workplace. And it does some nice team stuff and some job definition things. So there's lots of them. There's DISC, there's Enneagram, there's dozens of these. Kolbe, there's all these. My rule with assessments is all assessments are wrong. Some of them are useful. Right, so it's don't read too much into them other than their feedback tools. They give you insights which you can use. So that's my email address for that. These are some of my other resources. So the articles are right for Inc., the two podcasts that I mentioned, if people want to check those out. The work that I do is mainly around strategic planning, quarterly planning, and then I do some leadership development and management training, and then I run some CEO roundtables. So that's how I work with folks. And this is my contact information. I'll link if anyone has a follow-up question or wants one of the assessments or anything like that. That's how you can contact me. So that's what I have for today. I didn't see any questions come through on the Q&A. So I don't know if I guess I'm perfect. I guess I've just answered all the questions and laid out a perfect presentation. Everyone's going to be a CEO by the end of the next week. But if you have questions, you certainly throw them there, or you can follow up afterwards. I think we're making the slides available as well, so
yeah, absolutely.
you'll get that information. So, but yeah, not an easy process. I must say that not every CEO, not every founder makes it to CEO. It's just the fact of the world. But you can. It's a question of if you want to make the change, if you want to do the work, if it's really where you want to be, that's kind of where you have to start. Because if it's not really where you want to be, it's a lot of work to do. Painful. Ooh, I saw a question come through. When is a good time to make the interest? Yeah. So I look at it as the organizational dynamic. So yeah, I mean, Series A, funding levels to some extent, but I really look at it as how many people do I have. Right, because that's really where a lot of this focus stuff starts to change. As I move, go from that kind of approach that 100-person mark, and certainly as I get to that 500-person mark, I better be through that journey, right? I'm not going to be able to push through that effectively if I haven't made that transition, right? So I think of it as number of people more so than raw money, because it depends on the business model and how people are going to use capital. I mean, I've seen businesses that are $50 million that have 5 people in them, right? And that's not you don't have that same kind of CEO demand from those kind of situations that you do once you start having, a couple hundred people involved. So I think I answered that line. What's the range number? Well, so I would go back. I will do this one and then we'll see what else. So I look at this. I look at this graph. Like I said, I think you start to feel it at 100. Once you kind of hit 100 people, I mean, you may feel it sooner than that, but certainly 100 people, you're going to start feeling the need to make that switch. And by that time, you're at a couple hundred people. Probably earlier than 500, but you really need to have made that transition, or you will not make it to 500 unless you make that transition successfully. What are the risks for founders who try to make the leap too soon? I think it's probably you're just the work is not there, right? You still need to be focused on founder material until you get to that point. I mean, in terms of the risk, I don't think there's a risk of stepping into that role. I think the risk is stepping out of the founder role, is that you're not doing the things that the founder that needs to be done for a company at a founder level. That's probably, I don't know, it was, if someone wants to do a follow-up on that one, we could talk about it. But I think that's really the issue there. I think those are the ones that I just saw come across. So Eric, I don't know if you had other ones that you saw in the notes, but
No,
yeah, that's
I think for me, and like one thing that that really resonated with me, and something that we talk about all the time is culture, and how as you grow, scale, because like I remember when I was working at Founder Shield, we had 15 people, and we used to have a group meeting like in a room with everybody. Everybody would go around and talk about your weekly goals, and you knew everybody very personally, and what everybody was working on simultaneously. And now we're over 50 people, still not within that threshold, but obviously much different. And it's something that we talk about all the time, is how you grow and maintain your culture, and also just maintain the values that have allowed you to be successful, and add certain things that you need to scale. And I thought it's interesting. The one thing that resonated with me is having the ability and discipline to step away, I think, is something that's really difficult. I mean, I find it for myself, even not as a founder or CEO, but VP of sales, like, hey, let me just do it. I'll do it quicker. I'm not going to wait for someone to respond. I'll just do it. And I think that's probably for me the best takeaway that I had, in addition to the culture. So those are a few things that I really resonated with me, Bruce.
Yeah, it's not easy. Like I said, I mean, making that transition to CEO is not an easy one. It can be a not very fun one, particularly if you've really enjoyed the founder kind of experience. So it's anyone can do it. Not everyone should do it. Is kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah. I think we had one other question that just came in from Greg.
Oh yeah, so we've expanded from 3 to 30 people over the last 2 months, and I'm needing structure and discipline in my D week. It sounds like personal structure and discipline. So I actually just did another webinar last week on something I call Defensible Calendar. And if you reach out, I can send you all the details. So one of the things is just building structure and routines. So Defensible Calendar is basically a way of looking at looking at the activities you really need to focus on, whatever role you're in, but certainly for CEO. And then creating an ideal schedule, an ideal calendar, blocking out time, and then protecting that time, strategically. And there's a whole series of things I can recommend on that. But reach out to me, and I'll send you the details on a defensible calendar. It's a key one for any executives who's looking to manage themselves, manage their teams.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, something that that resonates too is like non-work related things. Like I remember, like I was super busy, and our COO Carl and CEO would just like put working out on your calendar, like because sometimes you don't put non-work related things, and just defend that and not schedule anything else around it. So I know that question wasn't directed at me, Greg, but
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so one of my
something that I've
strategies,
done, yeah.
I remember one of the things that I did that worked really well is I would go into the office at about 6 a.m. and I would work till about 8, uh, and sort of process a whole bunch of things, tee a whole bunch of things up for other people, and then I would go to the gym.
Yep.
I would go have breakfast. I would read, kind of do my thinking time. I would come back to the office at 11 o'clock, and two things happened. One is that because I got in early with anyone, I kind of queued up a lot of things for folks, so people had kind of things on their plate that they could start chewing on. And those things that they wanted to kind of come to me right away, like they kind of start their day and they're like, oh, let me go talk to Bruce, right? Because I'm like easier to talk to Bruce. I wasn't there, right? So they had to go figure it out. And 95% of them got figured out by 11 o'clock, right? So just by not being there in the mornings, was a forcing function for the team to kind of resolve their own problems and start working themselves on and making choices. I mean, they had to decide what to do, and sometimes they had to make a decision, and we'd have to unwind it, or we'd have to give feedback on it later. But okay, so we're learning. That can be a really great one. And so I kind of combine the getting out of the office with getting to the gym.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap things up? Just real quick, give a minute or so for anybody else to write in.
Yeah, last call. I see some names on here that I know they have questions. They're just scared to put them on. Yeah. So I would say, the assessment stuff can be really helpful. I mean, I use that with a lot of teams, so that's a good place to start if people are kind of figure out where do I go with this, and then kind of go through that list. I mean, this is a good list.
And Bruce, maybe
Yeah.
I just had one question for you before we head out. But in your consulting, are there any sort of like quantitative measures? Because obviously everything's a lot of qualitative, right? You're trying to help build teams, and obviously strategy and the quarterly reports that each individual has. Do you look at certain like KPIs like for like your process when you're working with specific companies?
Yeah. So my job, what I work with companies on, I talk about strategy development and strategy execution. So strategy development is really who's our core customer, what does the competition look like, how does the market work, how are we going to differentiate, what are the attributes that we're going to double down on, how do we create an operational system to execute on those. Right? Strategy development, strategy execution is the quarterly planning you put in place to make that a reality. So my high level measure is the roadmap that we've put together. I work on a 12-quarter roadmap that has forecasts and milestones for differentiators on it. And I'm basically just measuring, are we hitting those or not? Right. That's the highest level metric that I'm in. And usually there are 5 to 8 key metrics in the business that we're forecasting out for those 12 quarters. So that's kind of the high level. Are we executing on strategy the way we envision? Why or why not? What do we need to do? How do we change, what we do to get better results? In the actual teams themselves, there's all sorts of tools that I'll use given certain situations, right? So if I've got team dynamic issues and we lack trust, or we're not engaging in constructive conflict, or we're not giving each other feedback, then there's other kind of things I can bring in. But those all come up as we diagnose problems and we see where we need to make improvements, or what the root cause is in terms of causing those problems. We'll address those as needed.
Got it. And Bruce, to wrap things up, really appreciate you you coming
pleasure.
out here and speaking.
Yeah.
This was extremely efficient. It was great. I think you hit like 40 minutes on the dot.
I try.
No, and I think that there was a lot of really good tools in there, and like you mentioned, just 1 to 2 good nuggets is kind of all you need. And obviously, as you start to add those things up when you attend different webinars, you start to put the pieces together. So really helpful. I learned a lot. I'm not moving into a CEO role, maybe one day, but I definitely learned a lot. And I think that even if you're not a founder moving into a CEO role, there was a lot of really good, just general tips in terms of how to scale an operation, which, resonate for managers and, VPs. So this was really helpful. And, from me, really appreciate it. And again, if anybody has specific questions or wants to talk offline to Bruce, he put his information in the slides. So don't be shy. And thanks again, Bruce. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.